does the VA document illnesses and injuries? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today we are going to dip our toes in the deep and icy waters of the Veterans Affairs Schedule for Rating Disabilities. And I just got to warn you that if you go far enough down this particular rabbit hole, you will run into an overwhelming amount of medical terminology and public policy legalese, and I'm going to try to avoid going that far today. But at the same time, I do want to get you oriented, like where to find information. I want to talk about some of the general policy to put ratings into the right context. And then I want to introduce you to the diagnostic codes that the VA uses and some of the implications that they may have for your claim. Then, by the time we get to the end of this whole thing, I'm going to show you a tiny issue with these codes that you need to be aware of. All right, first things first. If you do a search for the VA's Schedule for Rating Disabilities, or VASRD, one of the websites that often comes up is the VA's so-called Web Automated Reference Materials System, or WARMS. In fact, here's the URL for that site. In a second, I'm going to suggest that you not use this site, but lots of people do, so it's important to understand what's there. If we click on one of the major systems of the body, say the musculoskeletal system, you get taken to another list of body parts and injuries and illnesses. And for each of those subsections, there's a link to a Word document that you can download and review the details. For example, here we're looking at the joints. Now, remember I said I really don't like the VA's website? The big reason for that is that this is all just secondary information. What you see on their website is just copied information from the Code of Federal Regulations. I gotta be honest, some of the dates start to make me nervous. Notice that the list of disability ratings was last updated on January 17th of 2024. And when you look at the Word document, it seems to date back to 2005. Now, plenty of federal documents stay the same for decades, but personally, the fact that it's 20 years old and it's a copy, I don't like it. Plus, the fact that you have to download each and every one of these documents and then open it up individually. Well, that gets to be a pain in the neck really fast. So instead, I recommend going to the official website for the Code of Federal Regulations, ecfr.gov. This website has a couple of things going for it, including the fact that it is continuously updated by the National Archives to be accurate at a point in time. And one of the things to notice is that the title that includes the VA Schedule for Rating Disabilities was updated on June 17th, just 3 days before I took these screenshots. In fact, I was able to check using the official website. But something changed between January and June, and it does not look like the VA updated their website to account for that. Anyways, using the Code of Federal Regulations, you can drill down to Title 38, Chapter 1, Part 4, the Schedule for Rating Disabilities. And that's just like you can with the VA site. And if you compare the two, you can see that they both have Subpart A for General Policy and Rating. We'll talk about that in a bit. And they both have Subpart B for Disability Ratings. One of the features that I like about the Code of Federal Regulations is that they provide a couple of useful appendices. These are on the VA website, but just kind of hard to find among everything else. All right, so now let's just take a look at a couple of important points that are included in Subpart A, General Policy for Ratings. The first one has to do with what these ratings actually mean. Note that the percentage ratings represent the average impairment in earning capacity resulting from an injury or illness. They're meant to compensate both for loss of working time and for limitation of activity. So, number one, the rating represents an average impairment, not you specifically. One of the ways I like to think about this is, think about the facial scarring associated with chloracne. If you're a farmer, those scars don't matter at all. But they would seriously impact your ability to be, a TV talk show host. Luckily, the VA isn't really asking about the impact of your chloracne scars on your employment as a farmer. They're asking about the impairment of average earning capacity in civilian occupations. The next section reiterates this point about injuries or illnesses caused by military service and their connection to employment. Each disability must be considered from the point of view of the veteran working or seeking work. I argue that once we get into diagnostic codes and their relationships to ratings, that this connection to work is very important, even if they don't specifically talk about it. And then, before I get off this section about general policy, there's something important about age that I want to highlight. When it comes to a service-connected disability, age cannot be considered as a factor. Suppose a VA evaluator is presented with two service members who both have knee flexation problems, but one is 25 and the other is 55. If the knee problem is service-connected, the evaluator can't say, well, lots of 55-year-olds have knee problems, so that's not an injury or illness caused by military service. Of course, just like everything else in this bureaucratic world, there is a caveat, and that is that age can be considered when evaluating someone for a non-service connected disability. The example they give is for a VA pension. And just as a reminder, the VA pension is entirely different than the Department of Defense pension that retirees get. And the VA pension is entirely different than the VA disability payments. Okay, now let's dig into some examples of disability ratings from the Veteran Affairs Schedule for Rating Disabilities. One great place to get started is just to look at Appendix B to see the numerical index of disabilities. In fact, one of the great reasons to start here has to do with those diagnostic code numbers. This is how the VA classifies injuries and illnesses. You're going to see them everywhere in the Schedule for Rating Disabilities, and at the end of this video, I'll point out one reason that these might cause some confusion. For many illnesses and injuries, you're going to find a table that lists standards associated with different levels of rating. The first point to notice about these rating tables is that a specific diagnostic code, here we're looking at 7326 for Crohn's disease, well, a specific diagnostic code doesn't necessarily have a rating from 10 to 100%. Sometimes they skip rating levels. For instance, if you're diagnosed with Crohn's disease, you might get a rating of 30% or 60%, but you will not get a rating of 40 or 50. The second point to notice is how specific these rating standards can get. Here, a 10% rating is warranted with recurrent abdominal pain with 3 or less daily episodes of diarrhea. To get to 60%, you need outpatient treatment with immunosuppressants, 4 to 5 episodes of diarrhea a day, and signs of toxicity, such as fever or tachycardia. The so what about this second point is that these are pretty objective standards. And you can imagine how important it is to your claim that your medical records clearly show these standards. Now, not all injury or illness diagnostic codes go all the way up to 100%. I mentioned chloracne before, and here you can see that even deep acne affecting 40% of the face and neck, it only rises to a rating of 30%. My point here goes back to something that we discussed when we were talking about combining ratings. Each additional rating has a diminishing effect on your final overall rating. And there are some people out there who are pursuing 100% total rating by going after specific codes without first making sure that it's even possible for those codes to get a high enough rating. The next thing to keep in mind is that not all diagnostic codes have unique rating tables. Here you can see that there are plenty of different codes for tinnitus, but they all reference the same rating table. In fact, notice how the rating table mentions the diagnostic codes that apply to it. The thing to keep an eye out is that you reference the correct general ratings table for the specific diagnostic codes that you're working with. And that brings us to our final slide and a point that it just baffles me. Because a couple of times in this video, I've used the phrase, the diagnostic code that applies to you. But what diagnostic code does apply? And like my old master sergeant used to say, there ain't nothing easy. Remember how these diagnostic codes are coming out of the Veteran Affairs Schedule for Rating Disabilities? Well, guess who else uses these diagnostic codes? Absolutely no one. In fact, TRICARE appears to use the International Classification of Diseases, which means that while you're in uniform, when you go to visit your PCM, they are going to use an entirely different system of diagnostic codes than will be used for your VA claim. And look, I am confident that there is some reasonable and well-used crosswalk within the VA to take ICD-10 codes and turn them into VA codes. But the fact remains that as a service member approaching a VA evaluation, there can be a lot of uncertainty about what diagnostic codes apply, despite the fact that you've got hundreds of pages of clear, objective information. If you know any ways to make this whole process more transparent and easy to navigate, I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, take a look at this video on combining VA ratings to get a new perspective on how that whole process works.